So thanks again to Kaylee and Vanessa for the introductions. A big thank you to Erik Olsen and Mark Pocan for taking part. I am obligated at this point to point out that both of our candidates are proud UW-Madison graduates. So I'm going to ask for some applause. We're not going to talk about when that happened. So the candidates have agreed to the following rules for the forum. Each candidate will make an opening statement of no more than 2 minutes. The order of speaking has been decided by a coin flip. We will then proceed to a series of questions. Each question will be posed to one candidate and then to the other, alternating who speaks first. The first candidate will have 90 seconds to answer. The second candidate has 90 seconds to respond. The first candidate then has 60 seconds for rebuttal. The candidates and I are able to see a countdown timer so we know how much time is left for each answer. I created all of the questions, aside from 2 that were submitted by students, so thank you to all the students who submitted potential questions this week. As moderator, I will not be serving as a fact checker. That's the job of the candidates for each other and for the media. The forum will end with closing statements of 2 minutes each in reverse order from the opening statements, and we'll finish at 8 o'clock. Aside from the applause you just gave for the university, we ask there be no applause or other noise from the audience until the forum has concluded. So with that, let's begin with opening statements. By coin flip, Mark Pocan was selected to go first.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming tonight. Thanks to the center and all the groups sponsoring this. We appreciate it. Thanks to Erik. We don't get a lot of opportunities to do this together, so we appreciate when we do get the opportunity to. It's been my honor to serve this district for the last 12 years, and it truly has been an honor. I think some of the most rewarding things that we do are help the constituents who call us up who have problems with the IRS or getting their veterans benefits or trying to navigate any of the federal agencies. But we also do policy work in Washington, allegedly. This session, maybe not so much. It's been a pretty rough session. They said we're on target to have the fewest bills passed since the Congress of 1860, which is pretty disappointing. But I'm hoping we can change that in November. We are 4 seats down, and we can have a different majority that hopefully will change the rules that made this session pretty difficult to get anything done. I'm proud to serve on the Appropriations Committee. I specifically serve on a couple subcommittees where I have a little more expertise on the Labor, Human Services, and Education Subcommittee, and also on the Financial and Other Government Services, and that includes things like the Postal Service and the IRS. I also am a past chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, current chair of the Congressional Equality Caucus, and current chair of the Congressional Labor Caucus as well. And every day in Congress, I am trying to fight for values that I think connect with people in the district. Progressive values from universal health care to a more sane Pentagon policy, to fighting for workers and for fair tax proposals. I've also been tagged by our Democratic leadership to serve in a couple kind of select subcommittees. One dealing with the Farm Bill, and unfortunately this Congress has not been able to get a Farm Bill to the floor for a vote. Should have been done last year, September 30th, and then this year, September 30th, and hopefully by the end of the year. But also one on Project 2025, which I hope we'll get a chance to talk about tonight because it's a pretty dystopian plan. My time is up, so I look forward to the questions.
Thank you. Erik Olsen.
My name is Erik Olsen. I grew up here in Madison. I went to West High School, but my parents were born in New York City. My father in Brooklyn and my mother in Manhattan. And they came out here after my father got the GI Bill. My father obviously was, by my name, you know, probably of Norwegian heritage, and my mother's Jewish. Her name was Sobel before we got married. And her father was a sailor, and when he came here, he was so poor growing up. His father died when he was very young, and he didn't have enough money to go to Hebrew school. But when he got here, my mother helped get the money together. And in 1987, and I think he was 75 years old at the time, he had his bar mitzvah. So we have deep roots here. I went to undergrad here, I went to graduate school here, I went to law school, and I got a master's degree. And in fact, in this very building, we used to have a gymnastics club upstairs. I was a terrible gymnast, but I enjoyed it. So I am proud to stand before you as the Republican candidate for Congress. With all due respect to my opponent, I feel like his party has badly lost its way. They used to be a party that believed in freedom in the Constitution. They do not anymore. Now we Republicans are the party of the Constitution. They used to be a party that believed in working people. Now we're that party. They used to be a party that believed in peace, but it has been just endless wars since their administration or regime came into power. The blood is flowing into the soil and we need peace. But perhaps worst of all, they have become a home for one of the most ugly types of anti-Semitism. An anti-Semitism with a disgusting intellectual veneer over it. And I believe, with all due respect to you, Mr. Pocan, you have crossed the line. And it pains me to no end. So I hope you apologize.
All right, we head into questions, and the first question will go to Erik Olsen. It's about immigration, one of the hottest topics in the presidential campaign this year. One organization estimates that 11 million unauthorized immigrants currently reside in the US. Mass deportation of those immigrants is somewhat popular in public opinion surveys, but also opposed by many and impractical to many others. If you could write the bill to deal with this aspect of the immigration debate, what would you do?
The border in this country is not compassionate, it's cruel. People flood over the border looking for a better life, and instead of a better life, many of them find themselves being trafficked for labor, and even worse, sometimes for sex. They're sold into the sex trade by the cartels that move them across the border because our utterly incompetent Congress cannot get their act together to pass immigration reform. We need a common sense way for people who want to look for a better life to come across this border. There has to be a program where they can get work permits, where they can come legally. We have to make sure that they're not criminals or war criminals or involved in cartels. But if they want to come participate in the American dream, and Congress makes sure that they're not going to undercut labor, because it is very unfair to American labor to bring endless floods of people in to undercut their wages, then they come. They get a number, they come in with an identification, and after 10 years perhaps they leave, and perhaps then they bring something about the great traditions of our country back to their country, maybe even along with some money to start a business or buy a home. So we have to stop this cruel order. Half of the kids who are trafficked are boys, half are girls. They're tortured sometimes, they're hurt, and they're sold. And the administration of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden is responsible.
Mark Pocan, 90-second response.
Sure. So there's no question, and I agree with Erik, that the border has been broken, how we've dealt with it for decades. Congress has not done what it needs to. No president can, they don't have the power to do it, but Congress has to. When I first got to Congress in 2013, there was a bipartisan bill that passed through the Senate, 69 votes. Think about that. How many times do you hear of anything passing with 69 votes in the Senate? That would have had extra protections at the borders and would have had a pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans. Unfortunately, at the time the Republicans were in charge of the House, John Boehner never took the bill up, and then ever since then, we've only gone downhill. And with the rise of the nationalism, Donald Trump, and the rhetoric, unfortunately this issue has become toxic. And finally this year, there was an effort in the Senate to try to have a bipartisan bill that once again addressed the border with extra protections, had a pathway to citizenship, and made a sane policy, which we don't really have at the border right now because Congress has not acted. And unfortunately, even though there was a bipartisan bill, Donald Trump said no. He wanted this to continue to be a political issue, and the Republicans didn't proceed, and we had no luck to bring this forward. So, you know, I think for all the rhetoric that's out there around the border, action does have to happen, and I agree with Erik on that. Unfortunately, there was an opportunity this year to have something move, and Donald Trump wouldn't allow it. Unfortunately, the Republicans in Congress all followed in step, and we still don't have a solution.
Erik Olsen.
The border bill would have accomplished precisely nothing other than spend a lot of money and allow perhaps 1 million or 1.8 million people in per year with the same broken system. I practiced some immigration law when I started out in legal practice, and I know what a mess it is. We need a new category of people who can come on an easy to acquire work visa that's coupled with a promise that they'll go back at the end of that time. And quite frankly, I think people are tired of hearing the blame game in Congress. Well, we didn't get it done because of the other party. We didn't get it done because of this. We didn't get it done because of that. The people who are in there are not getting it done. So I'm here standing in front of you. I think you can feel a little bit of the passion that I have about this topic. And if the people who are in there aren't getting it done, then vote for someone else and give someone else a chance. Give me a chance. Vote for me. Thank you.
All right, we change subjects now. This is a question for Mark Pocan first. It's a version of a question submitted by a student. The student is Ambika Muralitharan. She's a junior. Here's the question. A recent study found that apartments in Madison get rented faster than anywhere else in the country. Rental prices here have zoomed upward in recent years. What is your plan to make housing more affordable and accessible, not only for students, but for anyone who wishes to live in Madison?
It's a great question, because there's no question housing costs have gone up. We need more housing stock. That's fundamentally at the core of the problem. But nationally, there's a couple things. One, we are seeing a real trend of outside entities, hedge funds, buying up housing. In fact, our nephew was moving down to Georgia, and every time he'd look at a house on Zillow would buy the house. And it was impossible to get that house. And when these entities are buying that up, that's jacking up the cost. That's one thing. Two, Vice President Kamala Harris has said she has a plan to help first-time buyers. We need to do that because we need to get more people into housing, and that'll open up other opportunities of housing for people. Also, we just need more stock, especially on the lower income side of housing. If we do that, that'll help relieve some of the pressure around rents. But there's no question that one of the most important things that we can do is go after this process out of really New York, out of hedge funds, out of these entities that just buy up housing stock. There's a real need for us to do something in Congress around this, and that's something that I'd strongly support. So we need to do more. We need to have more housing stock. The way you do it is, one, build more low-income housing. Two, make it easier for people to move through the housing cycle, and the Vice President's trying to do that, and actually stop this purchase by hedge funds and others who are private equity who's buying housing up.
Erik Olsen.
Again, with all due respect, first the congressman blamed Donald Trump, now he's blamed the hedge funds. And who the list of blame game will go on through the night, we'll just have to see. The reality is, it is a mess, and the Biden-Harris administration has done nothing to fix it. We have to make it so that young people are able to afford homes and buy them. We have to make it so that older people who are ready to move on can afford a condominium. Right here in Madison, we hardly have any condos getting approved. We have a slow process to get housing approved. And a lot of times when that housing does get built, it's built at such a size that it becomes too expensive for people to participate in it. So we need common sense reform so that people can build and quickly build the housing that they need. It's a situation of supply and demand. And when the supply goes up and the cost goes down, people will be able to participate in the market again. As long as the supply is kept constrained, the prices go high. And I'll tell you something, the Democrats used to be the party of the working class. They are not anymore. Not even the Teamsters like them anymore. The Teamsters voted almost 60-34 in favor of Donald Trump. And in the first time in a very long time, the Teamsters declined to endorse the Democrat candidate. So they are not the party of the working class. We are the party of the working class. We will solve the working class problems if you give us a chance. We will make housing affordable.
Mark Pocan.
Yeah, I don't know if I heard a solution in there, but I can tell you that the Teamsters in Wisconsin were the first Teamsters in the country to endorse the Vice President, so I'm very proud of labor in Wisconsin. Having said that, I really think on this private equity side, and that issue is something really central to all of this, and it's buying up a lot of housing stock, it's making prices around the country increase. We need to do more to have additional housing stock. I know you don't get the opportunity, Eric, like I do, but in talking to realtors and builders and people who work with some of the rental organizations, this is the core. We just need more supply, and it's not about having the ability because the city or someone isn't approving it. It's the need for affordable housing specifically, and that often takes some investment from the government, and that's part of what we also need to do. So there are solutions out there, but it's something that's going to take a working Congress to do, and right now with Republicans in charge, we have just the opposite of a working Congress.
All right, next question to Erik Olsen first. The war in Ukraine has been raging for more than 2 years since Russia invaded the country in early 2022. Americans are not directly in harm's way there, but Congress has appropriated more than $100 billion to support the Ukrainian government defending itself against the Russians. Is this the right thing for the US government to be doing in the region?
Well, first of all, I just want to add, I am a property rights lawyer, so I'm constantly talking to realtors, home builders, developers, everybody else, and local governments, and we're quite often suing the local government because they are standing in the way of everything. But Ukraine is a danger to us. We are on the verge of World War III. And as I said, the Democrat Party used to be the party of peace. They are not anymore. They are the party of endless war and endless profits for their friends in the military-industrial complex. Just look at what happened. We were in a time of comparative peace, and then the Democrats came into the Oval Office, and then we have bloodshed in Ukraine. We have bloodshed in the Middle East. We have bloodshed in Sudan. The world is in flames. And to say that we are not in danger, with all due respect, Professor Burton, is a farce. We're on the verge of World War III. Israel is in danger of annihilation. Our friends in Ukraine are being overrun on the Eastern Front. We have to act. And the problem is we need strong leadership. And the only way that we are going to get strong leadership is putting people like Donald Trump back in the presidency and people like Erik Olsen in Congress. We will get it done. We will bring peace. But we have to have peace through strength. And peace through strength, above and beyond everything else, comes from moral certainty. And with the Democrats, we have seen no moral certainty, only moral decay.
Mark Pocan on Ukraine.
Yeah, it is interesting. One of the differences between the parties is, I think, how we look at, how you motivate people. I think we try to motivate people by their better selves. What can we do to help people have opportunities for their families? Others try to scare people. I don't think you need to scare people right now with what's going on in Ukraine. I think one of the priorities I have is to make sure we're not sending young American men and women, whether it be to Ukraine or be to the Middle East, because that should be a priority. And I think, something, at least it sounds like, Erik is in agreement that we don't want to have the U.S. get involved directly in these. But at the same time, with Ukraine, this is something we're doing because Russia invaded another sovereign nation. And, certainly Donald Trump has a very special relationship with Russia that's, I think, pretty dangerous should he win. I think you're going to watch a part of the Ukraine go to Russia, and that certainly shouldn't be rewarded to any country. It's invading another country. I hope we get questions on the Middle East, because I certainly have a lot of opinions on that. But I think, the fact that we don't have young men and women from the United States involved in these, and we have returned troops from Afghanistan, these are the sort of things that we should do. And I'd love to also talk about Pentagon spending if we get a chance.
So, interestingly, I didn't hear anything about the young men and women in Ukraine and the young men and women of Russia who, personally, I care a lot about. They don't have to die. Their blood didn't have to be shed over this silliness. And if we had had strong leadership in the Oval Office and we had had strong leadership in Congress, this war would have never happened. It happened because they saw weakness in Afghanistan. It happened because they saw weakness all throughout our country. And so they attacked. And now perhaps 400,000 young men and women are dead, 1 million casualties. That means people who are maimed or who have lost their hearing. Many more have lost their homes, and none of it had to happen. If you want peace, if you care about peace for us and for our kids, look at what the Republican Party today represents and vote Republican. It will send the strongest message you can send that we will not tolerate global war. We will absolutely not tolerate global war on our watch.
All right, we're changing subjects again. This one to Mark Pocan first about marijuana. So our country is now a pretty messy patchwork of laws about marijuana. Every state seems to be doing something different. Wisconsin is kind of a holdout compared to neighboring states where recreational use of pot is now legal. Possession of marijuana is still a federal crime, but the Biden administration is moving to reclassify it. What should Congress be doing to clean up this mess of conflicting rules and enforcement?
Yeah, this is one that should be a no-brainer, and I think we might have some bipartisan agreement, because I know some of your supporters I've worked with over decades on this issue. It makes no sense that a third of the states at least have legal marijuana, another third have medical marijuana, and to say that you still can't put your money in a bank is ridiculous federal law around this. We just have a very backward stance. The fact that we still have it as a Schedule 1, like heroin, makes no sense whatsoever. And unfortunately, it's the Republicans in the legislature that have been unable in Wisconsin to move any kind of legal ability to either have legal marijuana, to either have medical marijuana, to have anything. Instead, we're surrounded by states that have had more enlightened legislatures, which included Democrats and Republicans who voted for more sensible policies. But unfortunately, this Republican majority in the legislature has not done that. Governor Evers is supportive. I think obviously the people in Wisconsin are supportive. It makes no sense to be one of the lingering states that doesn't have legal marijuana, and I strongly support not only that in Wisconsin, but declassifying it as a Schedule 1 makes no sense. It's certainly, if you're a legal business, you should put money in the bank. There shouldn't be regulations against that, and I think we can understand that the time has more than come to have marijuana legalization in the United States.
Erik Olsen.
Well, interestingly, their candidate for president was district attorney and presided over a system where she locked a lot of people up for using marijuana. She locked a lot of young black men up for using marijuana. And then her office got caught up in a scandal where they got in some serious hot water because they were hiding exculpatory evidence. I think that disqualifies her as ever running for a position of trust, let alone the highest position in this country. I'd be interested to hear from Congressman Pocan where he thinks that sort of behavior is disqualifying. I believe that marijuana should not be on the federal schedule. I don't think the federal government should have anything at all to do with the regulation of marijuana. It is utterly ridiculous that in one state it's legal and people can sell it, but then they can't put it in a federally regulated bank, and they run into all these different types of situations. I'm not in favor of the use of marijuana. I think that it's actually kind of a problem for people. I'm also not particularly in favor of the use of alcohol, but it's a free country and people get to do what they want. And each state has to make up its mind as to how it wants to deal with that particular situation without the meddling of the federal government. The federal government in this country meddles entirely too much in state affairs. And if I ever did have the honor of serving in the United States Congress, and I hope I will this January, you will find me to be the congressman most in favor of making common sense reductions in federal meddling in state affairs.
Mark Pocan.
Yeah, I thought we might have a little bit of a libertarian streak among the two of us on this issue, and that's good. I'm not going to try to be as much nanny stater, but I do think that certainly this is something that the time has more than come for the federal government to put it on a different schedule, to allow people to legally put money into the bank. And the fact that we've had this fight every session, I think I've been there, it's really interesting. There is bipartisan support and there is some bipartisan opposition on trying to get this done right. So I'm glad to hear that. I think the only other thing I would mention is I saw the Vice President put out I don't know if you still call him a tweet because it's on X, I call him a tweet, saying that it's ridiculous that anyone should go to prison for using marijuana. I think she's very clear on this issue, and I think this should be the majority position of most people in this country.
All right, next question will go to Erik Olsen first, and this is a version of a question submitted by a student, Miranda Garcia Dove, a sophomore, also a student in my class this semester. It's about abortion, one of the hottest issues in the country since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade 2 years ago, a decision that allowed states to begin putting limits or outright bans on abortion if they wish. This has put abortion rights in Wisconsin in some limbo. What would you do at the federal level about abortion? Again, Erik Olsen answers first.
I'm glad we got this question. It's interesting. I spoke with a group at the Mount Harb High School today, and that issue came up, and we spoke about it for some length. To me, it is very clear that abortion is killing. It's a killing. There were 2 lives, and then with the stroke of the abortionist's knife, it's one life. One life is taken away. How we deal with that as a country is something that has torn us apart. And at the end of the day, although I am perhaps being a bit, perhaps maybe a bit harsh with my criticisms of Congressman Pocan and his party, maybe we believe in one thing very deeply, which is that the United States of America is the greatest country yet to exist in this world. We have disagreements with each other, sometimes fierce disagreements, but I believe that we are big enough as a country to find a way to end abortion without taking away anybody's choices, by supporting people and helping people make good decisions, decisions that they can feel proud of, and decisions that they can live with, and decisions that give that small, tiny life a chance. So I feel that way very deeply. But it is clear at this point we are both running for federal office, and the United States Supreme Court has made it abundantly clear that this is an issue for the states. And I respect that. And I do not think that in a federal office at this point in time, there's room to meddle in that.
Mark Pocan on abortion.
Sure. Well, thank you for that question. It's interesting, in the beginning, Erik mentioned that Republicans are really the party of freedom. Refer to this question with that. If you're really for freedom, you're for the freedom of people to make decisions about their own bodies, especially women, which is a majority of the country. And somehow we're paternalistically telling people how to behave. And Donald Trump bragged about ending Roe versus Wade. And then another variation of Donald Trump said that everyone was asking for it, every state, and that's not true either. But at the end of the day, what is true is, women have a right to make medical decisions with their doctors about their own bodies. And certainly we don't want people to have abortions. There are certainly many extenuating circumstances, but to take away that freedom, just like so many other freedoms that the current Republican Party, not the Republican Party even a decade ago, doesn't want to give people, is really pretty scary. I think we need to codify Roe versus Wade. We've tried to do that in past Congresses. In the House, we didn't have enough votes in the Senate because of their weird rules around the filibuster. But that's something we need to do. And we need to start respecting women. And you do that by not having 1849 law in Wisconsin, which is exactly what Donald Trump and the Republicans did when they saw Roe versus Wade overturned.
Erik Olsen, rebuttal.
Around the time of Dobbs, I believe, Congressman Pocan made a tweet that said 7 times in a row, abortion is a human right, abortion is a human right, and on 7 times in a row. And I ask you, Congressman Pocan, is it a human right to end the life of an 8.5-month-old child, or a child the day it's born? Is there a human right to end that life a day before birth? You can have my 30 seconds.
Well, we're going to go on to the next question, and then Mark Pocan has the right to answer whatever he wants. This next question is about gun violence. Everyone seems to be upset by the levels of gun violence in the country, especially mass shootings. Public opinion surveys show high support for some specific policies, things like mandatory background checks and red flag laws. Support for banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines is more divided along party lines. What would you like to see in a big bill to address public gun violence? And if you want to address abortion as well in that question, that's fine.
Sure. So whether it's a big bill or several little bills, we need to do something about gun violence in this country. It's a uniquely United States, North American problem. Other countries don't have it nearly at the scale we do. And part of it is because we've got a Congress and we've got state legislatures that are often bought by the National Rifle Association. National Rifle Association is not people who own guns. National Rifle Association is gun manufacturers who make money selling guns. And no one is trying to take away someone's hunting rifle or their handgun for personal protection, but no one also needs a military weapon to have around the home, and no one certainly should want people being able to get guns without a background check. So a couple things. One, I think background checks that actually cover people who aren't just buying at a gun shop. All the gun shops that are paying taxes, brick and mortar shops, have to do a background check, but you can buy a gun off an ad in Craigslist with a paper bag full of cash, and you have no background check. That doesn't make any sense, so we need to have a little more coverage there. I think on some assault weapons, we used to have an assault weapon ban, that would make sense, or at least a magazine, the size, the number of bullets that can go out, trying to adjust that. But I can't tell you how many times in Congress there's a mass shooting, it's all too often, and we have a moment of silence, and we have no moments of action. It's time for this country to have action when it comes to gun violence, and we simply aren't getting there.
Erik Olsen on gun violence.
I would note that Congressman Pocan was given the opportunity to answer my question about whether he thought it was a human right to end the life of a child that's 8.5 months old or the day before birth, and he didn't answer. Is it a human right to do that? As far as gun violence, the right to keep and bear arms is one of our fundamental rights in this country. Several hundred years ago, the framers of this country came together and they set forth certain very important rights that the government is not supposed to infringe on. There was no guarantee that it was going to be easy. There was no guarantee that it was going to be safe. But they thought that that was the surest way to guarantee our freedom as far as possible into the future. Now we have a Democrat Party that wants to chip away at our right to keep and bear arms, and then we find out that they want to chip away at our freedom of speech. We have candidate Harris, who's insinuated or actually flat out said that she thinks freedom of speech is more of a privilege and not a right. And it goes that way, one at a time. They take your rights away. We Republicans are the party of rights. We are the party of the Constitution. And to solve the gun violence problem, we need to prioritize mental health, we need to fight poverty, and we need to figure out a way to get along together. But I submit to you that we do not have and never had a gun problem in this country. We have a mental health problem, a poverty problem, and a problem that we have to learn to get along.
Mark Pocan.
Yeah, it's a cop-out of an answer. You have a right to go to school and not risk being shot. You have a right to go to work and be able to go home safe at the end of the day if you're a teacher in a school. If you want to talk about rights, there are common sense rights. And at the time that we wrote the Constitution, I mean, think about it. Guns were muskets. It took a long time to load a gun. You don't have Uzis and things that you can, as we change other laws, we've changed the size of the Supreme Court, we've changed the filibuster rules, we've changed so much. You can also change things to match where guns are. And to have those types of mass death type weapons is a real issue. And to say we don't have a gun problem, that is the problem, right? We definitely have a gun problem in this country. And we also have a mental health problem. I'll give you that. 30% of the people in prison are there for mental health. If 30% are there for cancer, you'd be outraged. We should be outraged about the mental health problem. But that is not the singular problem. It is a problem that the gun manufacturers want us to buy guns, period.
All right, the next question is on healthcare, and we'll go to Erik Olsen first. It's hard to believe the Affordable Care Act was enacted 14 years ago. Parts of the law have been dismantled since then, but it remains really the biggest recent effort to change the U.S. healthcare system. What elements of the ACA do you think should be repealed, and what pieces do you think we should keep or even expand? Erik Olsen first.
I think that, well, first of all, I would note in the last answer, Congressman Pocan essentially said that he does want to take away our rights because it's a different world now than when the Constitution was written, and I don't believe that. As far as the health in this country, we had a great candidate. His name was RFK Jr., and he ran on the premise of making America healthy again. We are spending something like 17 or 18% of our GDP each year on illness. And there is no amount of spending that is ever going to fix the problem if we keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker as a nation. So we have to make America healthy again. We have to heal our soils, which are demineralized and have been abused. We have to heal our bodies that have been damaged by the horrible products of the pharmaceutical industry and the chemicals that they put in our food. We have to get healthy again. And we have to heal our relationships. We have to figure out how to start getting along together and live together. We have to heal our cities by making sure that the people in poverty are able to be brought up. And it's our vision as the Republican Party to do that. That's why working class people are voting for us now. The working class people have left them because they are the party beholden to the billionaire class. They are the party beholden to global capital. All they care about is maximizing profits for a group of jet-setting individuals who fly around the world and buy congressmen and buy senators. And if we're not careful, they might just buy the White House.
All right, Mark Pocan on the Affordable Care Act.
Sure, I was gonna say, I thought it was the Affordable Care Act. So, first of all, tens of millions of people are covered by the Affordable Care Act. More importantly, all of us have protections. If you have a pre-existing condition, you now have the ability to get health insurance. That's because of the Affordable Care Act. Prior to that, if you had heart disease, if you had cancer, if you were a woman, it was considered a pre-existing condition that you could have a pregnancy. You could maybe be denied health insurance. That's profit insurance, not health insurance. So at least the Affordable Care Act has worked to give many more people health care. And I'm actually on the Affordable Care Act. We're the only people mandated in the country are members of Congress to be on it. And it works really well. I had open heart surgery 7 years ago on the Affordable Care Act. Thank you very much for the Affordable Care Act. But I also support Medicare for all. I want to make sure that every single person has health care. We're the only industrialized country that does not have universal health care. And there is a way to do it, and you can do that by taking the base of Medicare, expanding it, expanding that also for dental, vision, and hearing, because those are all health care. And we can join the rest of the civilized world and not just making sure that insurance companies and medical entities make big profits. Instead, we can actually care about health care. And I agree, let's help heal the soil, and other things are valid. But healthcare is what actually gets you when you have to go to the doctor. They're talking about the soil is not going to take care of it.
Erik Olsen.
Quibbling over the Affordable Care Act, and actually in Wisconsin we had Badger Care, which was Tommy Thompson's project, long before we ever had the Affordable Care Act. It's important that everybody have medical care, and we need some level of medical care for everybody at all times. We cannot ever let it become a situation where a person is without care. Particularly, because I feel so strongly about life, we have to support mothers who want to give birth. We have to help with child care. We have to do a much better job as the federal government making sure that there's a safety net. And I know it's a slogan, but I believe in mothers and babies, not bullets and bombs. That's where we should be putting our time. The Affordable Care Act is a gargantuan mess. We need to make it simpler. We need to return it to the state level. We have to make sure everybody is covered, and we have to get healthy again. Because as long as people are getting sicker and sicker, it's like quibbling over a leaky faucet when the house is on fire.
All right, next question to Mark Pocan. Students in this room are probably users of TikTok, but many policymakers are concerned about the security of the app. A federal law enacted this spring requires the Chinese company that owns TikTok to sell it to a domestic company or stop operating in the United States. Where do you come down on TikTok?
Yeah, that was one of the dumb things we did this year, and we did it in a bipartisan way. I was advocating for, making sure that we go after all social media companies that then sell our data off and our privacy off, and that's the comprehensive way to deal with it. But to try to pick out one company, right now there's a bit of a popular scare around China, and people want to say that somehow TikTok would do something. Well, I've been to the classified briefings, and I'm not saying something that's classified, but they had nothing to say that was worthwhile classified, that actually proved there was any risk from TikTok. So to go after one company, I hope this is what we agree on. If we have any kind of free market principles, you can't just pick out one company who hasn't done anything and stop them from doing what they're doing. I just think it was a terrible example of what Congress doesn't do right. More embarrassing was the hearing and listening to members, both Democrat and Republican, although it was about 5-1 Republican, who asked some of the dumbest questions I have ever heard as an adult in Congress in hearings, because they just don't know enough. We actually had a bureau that gave us technical advice that could have told us all this that the Republicans got rid of. So, if you can't get the outside advice you need, I don't need octogenarians who don't know how to use social media giving us legislative advice on what to actually do and what social platforms to actually have control over.
I see the world right now as a world where we are in a global struggle. On the one side, it is us and our allies, the best of which is Israel. On the other side, we have Iran, China, and Russia. They hate our way of life, they want to end it, and they want to sit atop the world order. Every company in China is actually an appendage of the Chinese Communist Party. This is the Chinese Communist Party that committed genocide in Tibet and is continuing to commit genocide in Tibet. This is the Chinese Communist Party that has enslaved the Uyghurs. This is the Chinese Communist Party that has arrested and persecuted House Christians in the Falun Gong. This is the Chinese Communist Party that is as close to absolute evil as anything that exists on the face of this planet. So if we have any inkling that they're manipulating our people and poisoning our people's minds with one of their companies, they have to sell it. That is the kindest thing we could do. I can think of much more appropriate things which don't involve them getting a single red cent.
Mark Pocan.
Yeah, I mean, this is the sensationalism, right, that I was talking about, that we hear. I wish that same passion was about, Russia invading a sovereign nation, but I think Russia's kind of bad, unless you're Donald Trump. When it comes to China, there are certainly things they do that we should be concerned about. When we make products there for 10 cents on the dollar and they steal our intellectual property rights, those companies, in order to try not to have American workers to save a dime or a quarter here and there, wind up risking a lot. A lot of that could be very valuable to our country. So there's a lot of things that you could have actual real concern about with China, but just this sensationalism. I've sat through the classified briefings and we asked the questions and they had nothing that they could point to that they were doing. And I don't know, how many of you use TikTok? Just raise your hand if you could. I mean, I watched the dog jump over the couch and break the table. It didn't make me want to, join China, It is ridiculous if you actually use the platform to say the things that too many people are saying.
All right, next question to Erik Olsen first. Both the presidential election and control of the House are up for grabs this year and very competitive. Let's imagine that your party wins control of the House this fall and you're part of the majority, but the opposing party wins the White House. What would be your approach to working with the administration during divided government? Erik Olsen first.
I think that the current incarnation of the Democrat Party is as big of an existential threat to this country as we've ever seen. So if my party was in the majority in the House and perhaps in the Senate, we would have to make sure that we allow them to do the good things that they want to do, because I believe that very strongly that when a party wins the White House, the party that's not in power should not be completely obstructionist. They've won a mandate with the will of the people, but we have to be the gatekeepers to make sure that they don't take away our right to free speech, they don't take away our right to keep and bear arms, both of which Congressman Pocan seems very, very willing to do because we live in a different world now. And we have to make sure that people are taken care of, because we can no longer sit by while our wealth is simply transferred from our pockets to the pockets of the ultra elite. And that's what's going on. It's happening through inflation, it's happening through our jobs being offshored, it's happening through floods of immigration coming in and undercutting wages. And I said before, the open border is a cruel border. It is not a compassionate thing, it is not a friendly thing. People are being trafficked, people are being hurt, and normal Americans are being hurt. There's a war going on the middle class, and that war is being waged by the Democrat Party. So if we were in the minority in Congress, our job would be to protect the middle class and protect the Constitution, but let them do their good things as much as possible.
Mark Pocan.
So if Donald Trump would win again, I think one of the main things I would try to do is make sure that his policies that have been written into Project 2025, which has been written by 140 of his former staff and cabinet secretaries and appointees and campaign staff, that's a dystopian view of what this country can be, doesn't happen. So I do agree that's kind of the job of us in the House to make sure that those bad ideas don't happen. I just wish, I think what Erik maybe doesn't know is the Republican Party in Washington is quite different than the views he's showing. When Donald Trump was president, he passed a tax cut that not only added $7 trillion to the debt, that he did more than every other president in history combined added to the debt. 83% of that money went to the top 1%. So all the elite and everything that are being taken care of, it's the people who can afford to go to Mar-a-Lago that get tax breaks, and the rest of us get the shaft. And in Project 2025, they take 7 tax brackets down to 2. If you make up to $110,000 as a couple, you're going to pay more, on average about $3,100 more in taxes. That's taking care of the wealthiest, and that's exactly the opposite, I think, of the vision that Erik has, because the Republican Party I know in Washington only is there for the fat cats, is only there to protect the defense contractors, is only there to protect Big Pharma and all the rest. So I wish his view of the Republican Party was true nationally. It's just not.
Well, it's interesting because who agrees with me is the Teamsters. Their membership voted 60 to 34 in preference for Donald Trump. Campaigning for the last 2 years, I've met many, many people who are normal working class people who say the country is on the wrong track under Biden and Harris, and that we need to get good, common sense Republican leadership back in Washington. And hey, If you think that Republicans in Washington aren't like me, then send me there so I can convince them and set them straight, because what I am talking about is the vision of our Republican Party going forward. You need people like me there to make sure that it goes that direction, but we are the party of the working class. We are the party of the Constitution. We are the party of making America healthy again. And actually someone had a quip earlier on, maybe we should have our new slogan be MASA, make America sane again. Because we have to have mental health care, but we also just need common sense, folks. The left has gotten loopy.
All right, next question to Mark Pocan first. One thing there's consensus on in the American public is that Congress is not performing well. A big majority says they disapprove of the way Congress is handling its job. It's been that way for a number of years. Political scientists would love to see some of the old practices come back, like using committees to hold hearings and gather expertise. What's maybe one reform you'd like to advocate to improve the way Congress works?
Yeah, so I think H.R. 1, the bill the Democrats introduced last two sessions, it's the most comprehensive campaign finance, elections, and ethics law reform ever introduced, would help a lot. Part of it is, as long as you have big money in politics, you're gonna have a problem. This year we're seeing bigger money at a proportion I've never seen before. Corporations are not people. Yet they are when it comes to campaigns, and End Citizens United is an effort to try to overturn that court decision. That's a part of H.R. 1. Part of it is the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to make sure that you can't make it harder for people to vote. It should be a right, and anyone who makes it harder should have to prove they're not disenfranchising someone. That's a part of it. Part of it is just the ethics in Washington. We need to have tighter controls. There are 15,000 lobbyists in Washington, by the way, 10% just for big pharma. That is something that we need to make sure that disconnection between the money from them and members is certainly separated. But I think having that as the 30,000 foot makes everything else a little easier. It's a little easier to make sure that we're not ripping off seniors on Medicare Advantage, because it's twice as profitable for insurance companies as normal health insurance. Once you don't have to worry about the money from those insurance companies going to candidates. And I think there's a lot around campaign finance and H.R. 1 that would specifically take care of many of the problems.
Erik Olsen, one reform.
That's a very good question, and one reform that would be tremendously helpful would be to abolish the use of omnibus bills. So an omnibus bill is a piece of legislation that goes through with a lot of things clumped together. And what ends up happening is that Congress people like Mr. Pocan and the others a lot of times come under pressure to pass massive clumps of legislation. And what that does is it reduces accountability. A lot of times the people who are voting on the bills don't fully know even what exactly they're voting for, or they have qualms about it, but they have to do it because there'll be a government shutdown or some hard thing will happen if it's not voted through. So we have to go back to a time when bills are voted on one at a time and where legislation moves through on a piecemeal basis. Another problem is actually, I hate to say this, but just civility. And I would like you to notice that I have tried tonight to be very civil, even when I've been harsh, and I do feel that I feel a little bit that I have been harsh. I'm being harsh because I think it is important to say things to people's face instead of saying it behind their back when they have a chance to respond. And to say it as much as we can in a thoughtful and eloquent way and give people a chance to respond to it. I think that people like you, who are ultimately the sovereign, you're the ones in charge of this country. I'm a sovereign too. We're all a sovereign. We're all a big part of we the people. And we have to get our elected representatives to do what they're supposed to be doing, which is a servant's work, to do our job. And part of that is splitting the things up so we know what they're doing and when.
Back to Mark Pocan on reforms in Congress.
Sure, and let me just say, I think you are very respectful, Eric, and hopefully I'm trying to be as well when we're talking. I mean, maybe that's unique to Wisconsin, or at least South Central Wisconsin, but that's the way it should be. There are too many Marjorie Taylor Greens in Congress. We certainly don't need more. So it's good to have this kind of a conversation. The only other thing I'd say, I guess, on the reforms, even though you asked for one, is I served on a committee to modernize Congress. It was an evenly split committee between Democrats and Republicans. Everything had to have bipartisan support. We brought back things like earmarks, but we made them transparent and in a proper way. And I was really proud of that work because I think we need to do more of that, and that would be helpful. And unfortunately, the way Congress operates right now, it's very much from top down, both in the Democratic and Republican Party, and it's harder for individual members to have that ability. A Republican and I both had proposed a different calendar where you'd actually get to know people a little more. It'll probably never happen because it's a good idea, but we're gonna probably try.
All right, we're gonna squeeze in one last question, and Erik Olsen will answer first. The two hurricanes that swept through the southeast U.S. in recent weeks were fueled in part by climate change. The consequences of environmental change have become so severe that the home buying app Zillow, mentioned before, is now including a climate risk score for properties on its website. What should Congress be doing in this area? Erik Olsen.
Well, we've had a Congress and a White House that has allowed our finances to be very badly mismanaged. And as a result of that, we're sort of in a situation where we don't have a lot of money. Maybe we have the money. If we have the money, it's even more of a shame. But when things like Helene and happen, and you see people who have died, the last time I looked, there were 90 people who had died already. Many people who had lost their homes, and we were talking about potentially, if I understand it correctly, giving them $750. Meanwhile, we have people flooding across the border illegally who are being put in hotels that I understand a lot of times the taxpayer is paying $349 or $350 a night. So it's crazy. Our priorities are upside down, and we have to get our priorities completely recalibrated. We have to take care of our people first, and we have to be friendly and nice, but we have to make sure that we have the financial capacity to take care of our people when disasters hit. And there always have been disasters, now there's more, but it's really no excuse to not be ready, because we know it's coming, and we know there's going to be more of it, and we have to get ready. And if Congress controls the purse strings, Congress should be setting aside funds and making sure that when things like this happen, action is taken.
Mark Pocan on climate disasters.
Sure. First of all, I think it's just accepting that climate change is real, that science is science. Hopefully at the university that's something we do, but that's been a challenge in Washington because too many people don't accept that. Part of Project 2025 actually wants to get rid of the National Weather Service that just gave us all the help through these hurricanes because they don't want to collect data because that's science. That's also crazy. We need to accept that there is real climate change happening, that weather events are getting more severe, that it's very costly for individuals, and their insurance can make it get very expensive in these areas, and you don't address it by ignoring it. So in the Inflation Reduction Act, we did a number of measures to help renewables, help tax credits so people could put solar and wind energy, so they could buy electric vehicles. I have 8.5 kilowatts on my house. I gotta tell you, there's nothing quite like getting that bill in late spring for $13 for your electricity. That's pretty cool. But it's also helping the environment by having that solar up there. And we need to do much more than what we just did in Inflation Reduction Act. But it's not something that, unfortunately, the Republicans in Washington have been willing to much less accept is even real. So that's the real fundamental problem, and these weather events are just, unfortunately, cause of not dealing with climate change.
Erik Olsen, rebuttal.
Well, so why are we spending limitless amounts of money putting illegal aliens in hotels, and then we don't have money for our people who are hit with disasters? If the Democrats are aware that climate change is real, then they should be getting ready for these disasters that are inevitably going to occur so our people don't get hurt by them. I have heard, again, with all due respect to Congressman Pocan, I have heard nothing other than a career politician coming in here and giving a litany of the reasons that he's gotten nothing done. It's blame Trump, blame the Republicans, blame the fat cats who buy up the property. Nothing is fixed. This country is headed in the wrong direction, and it's headed down the drain. I am asking for your vote so that I can be a part of fixing it, so that we can have a vibrant middle class, so that we can have a vibrant constitutional republic, so that we can be healthy again, so that we can leave a better America for our children. We know climate, storms, hurricanes, tornadoes are going to happen. Let's get ready and take care of people when they do.
All right, we've gotten to the time for closing statements. We're going to reverse the order from opening statements. That means Erik Olsen will go first. You have 2 minutes.
So it's been an interesting evening, and I hope a spirited evening. As I was trying to demonstrate throughout this process, I think that there is something horribly wrong with our government in this country. I think there's something horribly wrong with our federal government. I think that the Democrat Party, as it is right now, is probably one of the biggest single threats to democracy that exists. What did they do? The last 3 elections. First, they rigged it against Bernie Sanders in 2016. They killed his campaign. Then they rigged it against Bernie Sanders in 2020. Killed his campaign. This time they rigged it against RFK Jr. They sued him. Every time he went to go try to get the votes to be on the ballot, they sued him. But then they say, oh, if anybody even so much as suggests that somebody rigged something against Donald Trump, this is election denialism. But then we hear on the news that they're not even committing to certify the results of this election because they see that they're going to lose and they want to go out and parade around and say that it was a stolen election. So it's a farce. They're using lawfare to go after their political opponents. They're talking about taking away our rights, like freedom of speech and the right to keep and bear arms, and it's a shame. Don't Democrat have nothing to do with their party till they get it back on track. And eventually they will, because there's enough good people in their party that they will eventually come to their senses and they will abandon the harmful ideas that they're espousing right now that are antithetical to democracy and antithetical to our free future. If we say, no Democrats until you shape up, they will get the picture and they will go back to being a little bit better, and then the American people will have a legitimate choice between 2 parties that both believe in the ideals I just talked about here. And if Mr. Pocan, Congressman Pocan, doesn't believe that the Republicans are all about that, then send Erik Olsen to Congress to make sure that they are.
And closing statement now from Mark Pocan.
Sure, thank you. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. I hope you found this educational. We appreciate having Erik being here. The only thing I gotta disagree with you on one thing. Comparing RFK to Bernie Sanders is like saying you and I have similar hairstyles, right? I mean, there's quite a difference there. I'll leave it at that. So I want to do something real quick. I'm going to put this on. Derek Van Orden, this is what a debate looks like. This is my Republican opponent, Erik Olsen. This is me. This is what a debate looks like. This is what an audience looks like. Debate your opponent.
Here, let me
And the reason I say that is this is what we're supposed to do, right? And that's why I appreciate Erik. We're going to disagree on a lot of issues, but there are too many districts in Wisconsin where people won't even talk to their opponent, won't even have the conversation. That's disrespectful of everyone who's in the room, or who should be in a room, to actually hear from their elected officials. So I appreciate you coming out tonight. I think, you know, where I disagree with Erik is I think his view of the Democrats obviously is a little different than my view of the Democrats. But I have tried to lay out a number of the problems that we have in this country, what I'd like to see us get done. This Congress has been the worst Congress pretty much in history, but at least 1860 is what we're told for actually productivity. And the reason is the Republicans who took the majority didn't know what to do with it. Kevin McCarthy in particular changed the rules and made it so any one member could break the system, and guess what? They broke the system. They even broke the Appropriations Committee that I serve on. That's not the answer. What the answer is electing a Democratic president and the vice president. It is re-electing Tammy Baldwin, who's been an outstanding U.S. Senator, and to let a California banker take the seat was ridiculous. And to vote and support people who actually support real freedoms, and those freedoms are supported by Democrats. So thank you for being here tonight, and I appreciate you listening.
All right, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you, audience, for holding your applause for an hour. I want to thank again both of our candidates, Erik Olsen and Mark Pocan, for taking part in the forum, to our student interns, Vanessa and Kaylee, to our Mortgage Center staff that made this possible, to our other sponsoring student organizations, and to the audience for coming out on a weeknight and being part of all this. Let's give our candidates another round of applause.
Yeah, we're hoping, he just said if you want to announce it, but we're trying to do a radio forum in WCLO in Rock County in Janesville.
Yeah, so it sounds like we've agreed to another debate. Which day is it going to be? one of those two?
The 23rd, 24th, we think, but it's above both of our pay grades because we don't
That's
own our
right.
calendars.
Nice.